We're going deep today, and I mean monumentally deep on Claude Monet. We're not just looking at a few famous paintings. We're really trying to analyze this philosophical shift that happens in his work.
Right. It's a shift that, in many ways defines the entire transition from 19th century observation to 20th century abstraction.
And we're going to do that by looking at his two absolute titans of series painting.
That's right. We are dissecting Monet's late career through the lens of, first, the Haystack series, or Mules, which he painted between 1890 and 91.
Okay.
And then we're jumping to the colossal genre-defining Water Lilies, the Nymphaeus, which, that was his obsession. It occupied him for the better part of 3 decades, right up until his death.
Our mission today is all about comparison. We've pulled together sources from, everywhere, art history, sociology, even psychology and design theory, to compare these two series across 7 distinct dimensions.
Because the big question we kept coming back to is, how does Monet go from being this, meticulous hunter of light out in an open field?
Right, the scientific observer.
Exactly, to becoming this introspective weaver of color, completely enclosed in the world of his own private garden.
It's a huge change. But what's so fascinating is that even though those two worlds feel totally opposite, solid earth versus, fluid water, they share this core artistic DNA.
They absolutely do. They both have that Monet gene of seriality. The idea that the whole collection, when you see it together, is so much greater than the sum of its parts. You really lose something essential if you only ever see one.
Yeah, that's a key point. And they're also profoundly anti-narrative. The point isn't some story about gods or kings or peasants. The subject is just light, it's color, it's perception itself.
And ultimately, they're both trying to paint something completely intangible, which is the physical feeling of time passing.
So it's that journey between them that's so compelling. It's not just a change in studio location, is it? It's a total change in his whole relationship with the world.
100%. That shift from objective analysis to subjective immersion. That's the heart of what we're exploring today.
Okay, so to really get the profound nature of the Water Lilies, we first have to understand the discipline and the, frankly, revolutionary science that underpin the Haystacks.
And Monet's entire serial method, really.
His career wasn't some slow drift into fame. It was a revolution from the very beginning.
It really was. He was a foundational figure, along with artists like Renoir and Pissarro in the Impressionist movement. And this whole movement was born out of a collective, you said it earlier, a middle finger to the establishment.
Specifically the Paris Salon.
The Paris Salon. The institution that dictated what was and wasn't good art, with these incredibly restrictive academic standards.
And the name Impressionism actually came from an insult, didn't it? It was thrown at his 1873 painting, Impression, Sunrise.
It was absolutely meant as an insult. A critic saw it and was just, outraged by the loose handling and indistinct forms. He basically said the paintings looked unfinished, like mere impressions.
But they just took the name and ran with it.
They were smart. They reclaimed the term, and they used it to define their entire focus, which was on immediate sensory perception. They weren't just painting a scene, they were trying to paint how the light felt at that specific moment.
We hear so much about the Impressionists working on plein air outdoors, but the sources are really clear that Monet pushed this tradition way beyond what anyone had done before.
That's a really crucial distinction. You had the Barbizon painters before them who did work outdoors, but it was usually just for, preliminary sketches.
Right, they take notes and then go back to the studio?
Exactly. They'd go back to the formal studio to create the real, polished, final painting. Monet, especially in this mature phase, was often working directly on these huge canvases right there in the field. He was committing to that immediate observation on the grandest possible scale.
But even with that dedication to being outdoors, the series concept that just completely dominates his work in the 1890s, the haystacks, the poplars, the Rouen Cathedral, that was something else entirely.
Oh, absolutely. This series represents the true intellectual apex of his interest. This wasn't a casual project. It was a systematic, almost scientific, sustained investigation into the nature of perception itself.
He's recording the process.
He is recording the process by which our eyes and our brain interpret reality. The object, whether it's a haystack or a cathedral, it just becomes an algebraic constant. It's the fixed point in an experiment where light is the only variable.
And if you look at the method he used to the haystacks, it really does feel like a controlled experiment. This is where that Hunter of Light nickname feels so right. He's doing physics with a paintbrush.
The methodology was incredibly rigid.
Yeah.
I mean, he fixes the object, these stacks of wheat, in a field right next to his property at Giverny, and then he holds everything else constant while just systematically varying the light, the season, the time of day.
He's trying to isolate light itself.
That's it. He's trying to pin down this single elusive quality.
The logistics of that must have been just insane. He wasn't just painting one picture. He's managing, what, a dozen canvases at the same time?
The documentation suggests he would have up to 20 canvases lined up in the field. So when he started, he'd pick the canvas for, let's say, 8:14 a.m., clear winter light.
And then what happens when the light changes?
That's the thing. The reality of working outdoors is that the light can fundamentally change in as little as 10 or 15 minutes. So when it shifts, he can't just keep painting on that same canvas. He has to literally drop his brush, grab the next one, the one reserved for 8:30 a.m., slightly hazy light, and work on that one until his moment passed.
So it's not improvisation at all. It's a race against the clock, managed with this incredible discipline.
It was profoundly disciplined.
Yeah.
And what's also critical is that these paintings were often reworked later in the studio. He was capturing the raw data, you could say, out in the field.
Okay.
But then he'd go back to the studio to synthesize and layer that data over months, sometimes even years. And that allowed him to move beyond just recording a single fleeting moment, was what early Impressionism was all about, and toward refining this deeper, more poetic visual experience that really captured the cumulative feeling of time.
And you can see that time commitment in the paint itself. Let's talk about the impasto, that really thick, layered paint. In the haystacks, it looks almost geological.
It does, doesn't it? And that impasto isn't just a style choice. It's a commitment of time and material. He layered the paint so thickly that the surface has this palpable texture.
It's not a quick process.
Not at all.
Yeah.
He often had to wait for days, sometimes weeks, for one layer to fully dry before he could apply the next one, just to make sure the colors wouldn't turn to mud. And that technique creates this sense of density that simulates the atmosphere. And, as one critic so beautifully put it, the very materiality of light.
Like light is a thing you can actually touch.
Exactly. Like you can physically grasp it.
And this scientific rigor, it extended directly into his use of color, specifically this technique of broken color. This is where he really broke with centuries of tradition.
Oh, completely revolutionary. So instead of mixing your colors completely on the palette, which, tends to dull the vibrancy, Monet adopted this technique of broken color. He would place pure, unmixed colors, like a dab of yellow right next to a dab of blue, right next to a dab of red, side by side on the canvas.
So the real mixing, the blending, it doesn't happen on the canvas. It happens in the viewer's eye.
Precisely. Your eye optically blends those separate little dabs of hue, and it creates this shimmering, vibrant light that feels brighter and more alive than any color you could pre-mix with oil. It forces you to participate.
And his use of shadows, that was another huge philosophical break. He just completely rejected the academic tradition of using black or brown to make things dark.
That's one of the clear signs of his scientific mind at work. He understood that shadows in nature are rarely just gray or black. They reflect the complementary color of the light source.
So what does that mean in practice?
He established this rule. If the light hitting the haystack was a warm yellow, the shadow would be a cool purple. If the setting sun was casting an orange light, the shadow would be blue.
The opposite on the color wheel.
The exact opposite. And this use of complementary pairs creates this incredible visual vibration and depth. It gives the shadows substance and life, and it completely gets rid of that muddy quality of traditional painting. It makes the light feel kinetic.
Okay, so the Haystacks series is where Monet's ambition really crystallizes the whole series concept into, high art. It's the peak of his objective phase, dedicated to documenting how light interacts with solid, stable Earth.
This series did more than just establish Monet as a major artist. It established the legitimacy of serial painting itself as a serious intellectual enterprise.
Because the haystack wasn't really the subject.
Not at all. It was just a fixed stage for this optical drama he was creating. He was painting the atmosphere and the light surrounding the object, not the straw itself.
And the consequences of this analytical approach are just monumental. You can trace a direct line from this to the birth of abstract art. The sources all detail this incredible story about Wassily Kandinsky seeing these works in Moscow.
It's probably the most famous origin story in all of abstract art. So Kandinsky sees one of the Haystacks paintings in a gallery in 1896. And because of the incredibly saturated color and the brushwork sort of blurs the forms, he genuinely failed to recognize that he was looking at a haystack.
He had no idea what it was.
He was completely disoriented. He felt this profound shock. But it was because he was so moved by the raw, emotional power of the colors and shapes alone.
A shock of recognition for the wrong reason?
Exactly. And it hit him like a thunderbolt. If the object could be dissolved, if he didn't need to recognize the subject to feel the emotional and sensory power of the painting, then the subject matter was secondary.
Wow.
And that single realization becomes the philosophical cornerstone for the entire move away from representation in the 20th century. It makes the haystacks this indispensable bridge to non-objective art.
So this work really moved beyond that early Impressionist goal of just capturing a fleeting instant. It became something much more refined and poetic.
Yes. The
Yeah.
haystacks are where Impressionism matures.
Mhm.
These are not fast, spontaneous sketches. The complexity and depth of the color, which he achieved through that layered impasto and all the meticulous reworking in the studio, it shows months of attention being poured into what might have originally been a 15-minute observation in the field.
He transformed observation into poetry.
That's a perfect way to put it. Profound visual poetry.
And let's step outside the studio for a minute and look at why these simple agricultural forms resonated so deeply with the French public, especially in the 1890s. This was a period of massive national anxiety, right?
Yeah.
They were still reeling from the defeat in the Franco-Prussian War in 1870.
The historical context is absolutely essential here. France was going through this period of intense post-war recovery, but also massive social upheaval because of rapid industrialization. And these robust, sturdy haystacks became these potent national
Symbols
symbols
of what?
of resilience. The resilience of the French land, a return to what they considered the strong, enduring national roots, what the French call la France profonde, deep France.
So while the stacks represented, agricultural wealth and food security, they also offered this kind of psychological comfort after a humiliating national defeat.
Precisely. They were visual reassurance, a promise of stability and endurance in a time of radical change. And what's more, commercially, these paintings were perfectly calibrated for the rising urban middle class, the bourgeoisie.
Because life in the city was getting messy.
Exactly. Industrialization brought noise, pollution, anxiety to cities like Paris. And the haystacks offered an escape,
An idealized escape.
a completely idealized countryside that was free from the actual messy reality of farm labor. I mean, you notice the canvases omit the workers themselves. There's no one there. They are quiet, romanticized symbols of a successful harvest, of wealth, of tradition. Monet was offering stability and escape, but packaged in this highly modern aesthetic.
Which brings us to the psychology of the form itself. From a visual standpoint, the haystacks are incredibly secure objects. They are anchored, they're solid.
That sense of grounded safety is so vital. The stack is a clear, recognizable shape, a cone, a hemisphere, and it's standing solidly against the sky. And crucially, the composition almost always features a clear horizon line.
Which tells you where you are.
It distinguishes the solid Earth from the sky. It provides you, the viewer, with this stable foot-on-the-ground vantage point. You feel secure. You feel rooted in a traditional spatial reality.
And yet, even as they're providing this visual safety, the series is simultaneously challenging a really fundamental psychological concept: object constancy.
And that's the brilliant irony of the whole series. Object constancy is our innate cognitive belief that an object remains the same regardless of the light or the conditions. Red apple's a red apple, whether you see it in bright sun or dim shadow. Monet forces you to confront the exact opposite. He presents the same stable, anchored shape, but shows it morphing wildly through color and light and atmosphere in every single canvas.
So the stability of the shape is what allows our brains to process the radical instability of perception.
That's it, exactly. The series reveals that perception is not objective truth. It's a constant act of interpretation. By keeping that geometric form secure, he gives you permission to accept the radical visual changes. It's an intellectual challenge wrapped in a comforting image.
And this systematic approach, it translates directly into a really modern design sensibility. The sources point out that the compositions feel almost minimal, like data visualization.
They do. They're geometrically minimal. A strong horizontal field punctuated by these repetitive, strong, vertical or triangular forms. It looks systematic and modular. You have a fixed module, the stack, and a set of parameters, time and light, being charted and displayed.
That feels very contemporary.
It's a highly modern parameter-based design approach that totally anticipates later 20th century movements.
So the exhibition of the haystacks wasn't just this artistic triumph. It was a masterful communication and market strategy.
Oh, it cemented the Impressionists' place in the art world for good. The 1891 exhibition at his dealer, Duran Rule, was a complete game changer. He showed 15 of the haystacks all at once, in the same room.
Which created an experience that was totally new for the viewer.
Right. Instead of seeing disparate pictures, you saw the entire condensed process of time and light surrounding a single theme.
It was an early form of immersive experience.
That's a perfect way to describe it. The visual impact of seeing all those intense variations side by side must have been overwhelming. It wasn't just a collection of paintings. It was a single, conceptual work made of 15 panels.
And the commercial success just proved that Monet wasn't a rebellious outsider anymore.
The success was immediate and overwhelming. All 15 paintings sold quickly and for premium prices, between 3,000 and 5,000 francs each, which was a substantial amount of money at the time.
And that marked the transition.
It marked the definitive transition of the Impressionists from these revolutionary outsiders to highly valued market darlings and, crucially, stable investment tools for that new bourgeoisie we were talking about.
And by stripping the image of any complex story, no figures, no literature, just pure light on a solid object, the work became what one source called pure visual currency.
The removal of a complex narrative made the work universally accessible. You don't need to know the specific agricultural practices of late 19th century France to get it. You only need to understand light and color, which are universal human experiences. That simplicity made them incredibly powerful, both commercially and conceptually.
All right, now we make the jump. If the haystacks were about the external world, meticulously analyzed, the water lilies are about the internal world, meticulously constructed. We move from Monet, the hunter of light, to Monet, the weaver of color, from objective earth to subjective water.
The shift is total. He retreats from this vast, open, public field to the carefully engineered, fluid world of his own private garden at Givony. And this garden, which he bought and just continuously expanded, it became his entire artistic universe for the last 3 decades of his life.
And when you say engineered, we need to really stress the level of control here. This wasn't just a picturesque backyard. Monet basically became a landscape architect.
Oh, he was a demanding, controlling designer. He employed up to 8 full-time gardeners. He fought with local authorities to divert a nearby river, the Rue, just so he can feed his ponds.
He literally changed the course of a river.
He did. He meticulously curated every single plant, every shadow, every reflection, including that famous Japanese-style bridge, which was a very deliberate aesthetic choice. He literally designed the scenery before he ever painted it, just to ensure he had total control over his visual input.
He constructed his own controllable micro-universe to study, and that environment generated, nearly 250 works.
And that's why this work is so profound. He wasn't passively observing nature anymore. He was observing a nature that he himself had created, controlled, and personalized. That self-constructed world became the absolute boundary of his art.
So the late Water Lily series represents this really radical break from painting tradition, and it starts with a fundamental design choice: getting rid of the horizon line. That might sound small, but it changes everything for the viewer.
It shatters centuries of Western perspective tradition. In the largest lake canvases, Monet just eliminates the division between sky and earth. The entire canvas becomes the surface of the water, the skin of water, as it's been called. The sky only appears as this ghostly, fractured reflection on the surface.
So you, the viewer, you lose your visual anchor. Unlike the haystacks, where you always knew which way was up and where you were standing, here you're suddenly just floating.
It creates this profound sense of spatial disorientation. And this structural choice is the crucial technical precursor to mid-20th century abstract expressionism. The canvas becomes what they call an all-over composition, a full-frame, decentralized field with no center, no focal point, and really no clear entry point.
And that idea, the non-hierarchical continuous field that directly influenced artists like Jackson Pollock and Mark Rothko decades later.
It gave them the philosophical license they needed. If Monet could dissolve an object into a field of color, they could dissolve the entire landscape into pure gesture or pure color.
And the new scale of these panels, some of them were 5 meters wide, that must have demanded a completely different painting technique than the careful impasto of the haystacks.
The brushwork had to evolve. The tight, controlled layering of the 1890s just gave way to something much looser, rougher, and more overtly gestural. To cover those massive canvases, Monet was essentially using his whole body, swinging the brush across the surface.
It becomes a physical performance.
It's exactly that.
Yeah.
And the result is this multi-layered texture that's so much more chaotic and energetic than the haystacks. And that allowed him to capture the really complex visual interaction that is unique to water.
Yeah.
You have the transparency, the depth below, the opacity, the reflections on the surface, and the movement of the floating forms all at once.
We've traced the connection to abstraction, but we have to talk about the physical element that shaped the late water lilies, which was Monet's failing sight. He had severe cataracts. And this wasn't just a technical challenge, it became central to the art itself.
It's a profound physiological tragedy that he integrates directly into the work. Monet suffered from dense nuclear cataracts, which is a condition that filters out blue light, making the world appear increasingly yellow and brown and hazy. He did have surgery in 1923, but it didn't fully restore his sight.
And you can see that change directly in his later color choices.
Absolutely. The characteristic cool blues and greens of his earlier work, they just vanish. The late canvases have this aggressive, almost frenzied use of fiery reds, deep browns, and saturated yellows. Some critics at the time, they thought he was just going mad with color.
But the crucial point isn't just that his sight failed. It's that he accepted and integrated the distortion. He didn't try to correct it back to some objective reality.
That's the monumental step. He allowed his personal physical experience of the world, his subjective failing vision, to dictate the painting's structure. And that physiological challenge gave the work this incredible expressionistic intensity, a tragic strength that pushed it further toward abstraction than his earlier, objectively focused work ever could have gone. The painting became an unfiltered record of his internal sensory world.
So if the geometric forms of the haystacks provided the viewer with visual safety, the fluid fields of the water lilies offer something completely different: psychological dissolution.
They induce what's often called an oceanic feeling, a state of deep meditation or intense mind-wandering. Because the canvas lacks boundaries, the viewer's self-consciousness, that rigid line between yourself and the world, it just begins to dissolve. You're not looking at a picture, you're looking into a world that has no anchors.
And for Monet himself, a man known for his intense anxiety and this absolute need for control, this constructed world, was more than just the subject. It was a psychological refuge.
Giverny was his controllable micro-universe. It was designed to filter out all the external chaos that he found so distressing. And his repetitive process of painting the water lilies was, in many ways, a kind of compulsive psychological defense mechanism.
Wow.
It allowed him to find an internal peace by mastering this small, perfectly ordered, closed-loop reflection of the world.
And this intense focus, it all culminates in the experience of the grand decorations, the massive panels that are housed in the elliptical rooms of the Orangerie in Paris.
Monet specifically designed the space and the installation for a profound psychological effect. The elliptical rooms themselves, combined with the immense continuous scale of the canvases which completely surround you, they eliminate any external spatial reference. You are forced into an environment where you literally lose your traditional coordinates.
That's where the sources mention that feeling of induced vertigo.
Yes, that subtle sense of visual displacement or vertigo is intentional. It forces you to abandon rational identification. You stop trying to identify a lily pad or a reflection, and instead you just purely feel the color, the atmosphere, and the scale. It's environment art, designed to soothe and disarm the rational mind.
And the final profound layer of the water lilies is their historical context. Their creation coincided exactly with the horrors of World War I.
This series is the ultimate form of social escapism. The sources confirmed that the sounds of artillery fire could actually be heard near Giverny, yet Monet consciously chose to depict only eternal tranquility.
He admitted as much, right?
He did. He wrote that painting absorbed him enough that he didn't have to dwell too much on the ghastly, appalling war. He retreated inward, not to deny history, but to forge an artistic antidote to it.
And this very private retreat then transformed into this immense public statement the moment the war ended.
On November 12, 1918, the very day after the armistice was signed, Monet wrote to the Prime Minister, Georges Clemenceau, who was a close friend of his, and he offered 2 of his large water lilies panels as a gift to France.
With a specific purpose.
With the explicit intention that they be a monument to peace, a way to contribute to the healing of this profound national trauma and grief.
And Clemenceau, who was a formidable politician, he immediately saw the strategic power of this gesture.
Clemenceau successfully encouraged Monet to expand the gift into the full Grand Decorations, the entire set of 20 massive panels. And it was Clemenceau's vision that led to the special construction and display at the Orangerie.
So it became a national monument?
And this public national acceptance secured Monet's legacy as France's greatest living painter. It repurposed his decades-long, intensely private obsession into a powerful piece of shared public heritage designed for contemplation and healing.
Okay, so let's try to unpack this. We have two towering series, fundamentally linked by this idea of painting in a series, yet they're separated by this deep philosophical and technical gulf. You could almost summarize this as the story of modern art's journey from objective representation to subjective experience.
I think that's the core thesis. The Great Divide is really object versus field.
Right, so if we look at the haystacks, the focus was entirely on the land and light. Solid earth. This was objective impressionism, scientifically analyzing light's effect on a solid, contained object in a public space.
And Monet's role there was the hunter of light,
Yeah.
the rigorous systemizer.
Whereas the water lilies...
The water lilies are all about water and reflection, the fluid mirror. And this marks the subjective beginning of abstraction. He's seeking to create a boundless sensory field in his own private engineered garden. His role completely shifts. He becomes the weaver of color, the hermit.
Okay, so let's quickly connect the dots across those 7 dimensions we've been exploring just to see how that transition plays out.
Let's do it. So, starting with art history, the haystacks solidified the concept of seriality. They provided this analytical model, a fixed point of reference that influenced artists like Cézanne, who still grounded their work in structural analysis.
But the water lilies just completely dissolve the object. They lead directly to all-over painting. They're the clear conceptual precursor for Pollock and Rothko. It's the move from analysis to dissolution.
Exactly. Then you have painting method. The haystacks demanded controlled, dense impasto, a clear horizon line, a stable composition. It was all about giving the object volume and weight.
And with the water lilies, we see a complete reversal. The composition is decentralized, it's borderless, the horizon is gone, and the brushwork is free and gestural. It's all about depth and transparency.
Psychologically, the haystacks are grounded, they're secure, they deal with linear delineated time, they invite comparison. This is morning, this is evening.
The water lilies are floating, they're non-linear, they can even induce a sense of vertigo. It's all about meditation and the dissolution of the self, a search for internal peace.
In terms of design, the haystacks rely on classical secure geometry. The cone, the triangle, they function almost like a modular system design.
While the water lilies embrace a decorative, planar aesthetic, it's heavily influenced by Japanism, the flat surfaces and lack of perspective. They are designed as environmental art, meant to merge with the space around them.
Sociologically, the haystacks depict a public agricultural field. They're a symbol of national strength and tradition. They offer this detached, romanticized view of labor.
And the water lilies retreat entirely into a private, elite, constructed utopia. They function as profound personal and social escapism from the war and the trauma of modernity raging just outside the garden walls.
Historically, the haystacks are a symbol of post-war reconstruction in the 1890s. They're celebrating French national identity, looking outward toward recovery.
And the water lilies are a wartime retreat during World War I, which culminates in this powerful public memorial to peace. A massive, tranquil symbol at what really felt like the end of old European civilization.
And finally, communication. The haystacks were a very communicable concept, the same object at different times. Perfect for a traditional gallery, easy to market.
The water lilies require immersion. Their message is emotion first. You really need the orangery rooms for the full effect. But ironically, because they're borderless and all over, any little piece you crop works as its own abstract field.
Which makes them surprisingly perfect for modern visual platforms, like social media.
So after all of this, what does this all mean for us, for you, the audience, looking back at Monet's half-century evolution?
I think it means that Monet's personal journey mirrors the journey of modern consciousness.
Yeah.
He starts by believing in the objective sight of the Impressionists, measuring and systemizing light on thick, solid earth. And he ends by demanding that we accept subjective feeling, by losing the horizon line and sinking into the fluid depth of his own inner world.
So the journey from the haystack to the water lily.
That journey from the thick earthiness of the haystack to the fluid, reflective surface of the water lily pond is a perfect, contained microcosm of the birth of modern art itself. He showed us that the inner world is just as valid a subject as the external world.
And here's the final provocative thought for you to carry forward from this. We know from the sources that Monet was a man often paralyzed by self-doubt, that he frequently wanted to just quit painting altogether. Yet he achieved his most revolutionary work, the Water Lilies, at the very end of his life while losing his sight and living through a world war. So, if the ultimate meaning of the water lilies is simply that they look nice, as some detractors suggested, does the sheer scale of the artist's immense decades-long struggle and his final act of immense public generosity gifting this monument to peace to a traumatized nation, does that transform mere aesthetics into a profound, necessary statement about the human need for beauty and for sanctuary, especially when the world is collapsing around us?
Something to think about.
Something to think about the next time you lose yourself in the endless, boundaryless reflections of the orangery.